It's my pleasure to welcome Sam Faddis, senior editor of AND Magazine, retired CIA officer, author, national security commentator. Welcome, Mr. Faddis.
Great to be here. Good to see you again.
I know you spent several years in the Middle East. If you could comment on what you see happening there and maybe the bigger picture, and then we'll get into the main topic.
Well, I mean, what's happening on the ground is horrific. Things for people to understand. I mean, Hamas is an Islamic terrorist organization. It controls the Gaza Strip, which is really a tiny little sliver of land wedged in between Egypt and Israel. And they have killed, I think the last number I saw is at least 1,200 Israelis. So not really so much terrorist attacks as it was largely an invasion. These guys are backed by the Iranians. They're equipped, trained, funded, directed in many cases by the Iranians. So I don't think there's really any. There's been a lot of discussion in the news about, are the Iranians behind this? The answer is yes. I mean, Hamas doesn't do anything that the Iranians are not on board with. Right now, I think what you're waiting for is to see the Israelis go into Gaza. I mean, they're shelling it, there are rockets, so forth. But I mean, a ground assault, I think they're going to go in, and this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better. And then the real danger is that it's going to spread in a whole variety of ways outside of just Hamas and Israel. I mean, the Israelis already bombed Syria, I understand. Hezbollah, which is another terrorist group, is already firing rockets and mortars into Israel. And there's a whole host of other bad actors that are out there also threatening Israel. So folks should not look at this and think, okay, well, the worst is over. That was horrible, but now it's winding down. That's not what's happening at all. This could get a lot worse before it gets better.
Okay. And we here in America, I mean, we're separated by a pretty big ocean, and our hearts go out to the Israelis for sure. And there were some Americans who were slaughtered there as well, but we're relatively safe. I mean, there's nothing for us to worry about. I mean, this doesn't affect us here in America, does it?
Well, and I know when you say that you say that tongue in cheek. That's look, this could be here. This could be here any day. I mean, let's just be real and, kind of skip the bobbing and weaving and obfuscation, and let's just talk in real terms. We don't have a border. I mean, there's an imaginary line on the ground, but we don't exercise any control over our borders. And honestly, we don't that's just not, it's not just that we don't control the southern border and that we also don't control the northern border, but increasingly we don't exercise any meaningful control over who flies into the country. So it's not just that you can crawl across the desert and end up in Texas or Arizona. You can, in a variety of ways, just illegally enter the United States flying in. So we're wide open to an attack, right? And we've got millions of people coming here, and huge numbers from sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, and which are the hotbeds of Islamic terrorism. So I am not saying that every person who's coming here from sub-Saharan Africa or from Syria is a terrorist. Undoubtedly, most of them believe they're going to somehow be better off here. But when you don't have any control and you allow millions of people to flood in, obviously you have left yourself wide open for bad people to fold in with that flood and end up here. And we're not talking handfuls, right? We're not saying a half dozen guys might have snuck in. Mm-hmm. Relative armies of guys could have arrived by this point. There is literally nothing being done to stop them. If you talk about Hezbollah, which has been involved to a certain extent in this fighting so far, but not the primary actor yet, Hezbollah has a long, really documented history of prepping for terrorist attacks years and years and years in advance. Really meticulous. They accumulate giant stockpiles of explosives. They case targets. This is not the plot of a bad movie. This is, I mean, if you've worked Hezbollah, which I did for many years and against the Iranians, this is their MO. And we have caught their guys in the past on US soil, New York, Washington, DC, Chicago, doing precisely that. So what I'm saying is, Hezbollah jumps into this mix. You're not talking about them all of a sudden having a huddle and saying, hey, let's figure out a target to hit in New York. They're going to pull a plan off the shelf that they finished 5 years ago and have been updating. That's literally how they work. And they do it all over the world, by the way. So the scale of what could happen is truly horrifying. I mean, you could see really massive, very well organized attacks on our soil.
Okay. Well, I mean, we do have a border patrol. We have the Department of Homeland Security. We spend billions and probably hundreds of billions of dollars on defense and security. So I mean, obviously they're tracking this, and they're prepared to defend our country.
Yeah, no, I mean, look, let's just be clear. We got a lot of, let's just talk about the Border Patrol, or, the folks along the border. We have a lot of very serious boys and girls who know their trade. They're not clowns. They know how to do this. They know how to control the border. They know how to keep us safe. They would never say they can guarantee that nobody will ever get through, but they know what to do. The reality is they're being prevented from doing their jobs, right? I mean, the Biden administration has effectively transformed the Border Patrol into the welcome wagon. So their job now is, when you arrive at the border, to process you, not turn you around, but then release you into the United States. And keep in mind, I mean, it's a little far afield, but these folks that are coming across Central America are brought here on what amounts to a conveyor belt of camps, in many cases moved by buses between camps progressively north. Those camps are run by NGOs, non-governmental organizations, most of them affiliated with the United Nations. But their funding comes largely from the US government. So it's not just that we're not enforcing the border, right? We're actually, we bring these people here. Like, they're being brought here on your dime. And then the Border Patrol, in the current mode, simply processes them and releases them. And I think somewhere in the back of everybody's mind, because this is so mind-boggling that I get it, the average American is like, this can't be true, right? I mean, it is true. And somewhere in the back of their minds, I think most Americans think, okay, but they're screening them, right? They're checking their names against some database. We're like, what database? Right? There's a guy who showed up yesterday from Chad. Let's just take one out of millions. Right. Born in a village nobody ever heard of, who may in fact actually not know his exact birth date because there are no records. And his name is the Islamic equivalent of John Smith. Right. What, and you think there's no magic database that tells you, is he a member of ISIS? Is he a member of Al Qaeda? Is he just a guy looking to make a better life for himself? So if you actually look at the stats, when they run people against databases, they actually identify and turn around and send back as being somehow flagged dangerous, some tiny fraction of 1%. So, I mean, it's a statistically irrelevant number. It'd be just better to just say they don't really reject anybody. I mean, they run their names and they get no data, and therefore the guy is admitted. That's how it works. They all come in effect. They have no clue who they are. And I've had this experience working abroad with the agency. That you got a list of names of 400 guys that the U.S. military wants to work on a base in Kuwait, and they want you to run it through CIA databases. And I'm like, okay, well, the guy's name is Mohammed Mohammed. He was born in a village in Pakistan. Nobody's ever heard of it. He's not even sure what his birth date is. You think we have data in the database on Muhammad? I mean, the Muslim equivalent of John Smith? No, I mean, I'll run the names. I can tell you in advance what's going to happen. We will get no identifiable information on any of them because we don't know anything about any of them.
Okay, so we're letting in large numbers of unknown. These are apparently there's a lot of young men. Talk about that. I mean, is this a mix of women, children, old people, or what is the breakdown?
Yeah, so increasingly what you're seeing, and this is true from every country, that it's true from China as well. What you're seeing is what people describe as fighting age young men. In other words, 20 to 30 years of age, men unaccompanied by women or children coming here. And Michael Yan, who is a celebrated American combat correspondent who spends a huge amount of time down at the border and who I know pretty well, he says, look, I see these guys come out of Panama, the Darien Gap, which is a stretch they have to navigate, which is really tough jungle. And most people sort of stagger out of it coming north. And he sees groups of 10, 15, 20 guys moving together, physically fit, who come out of the jungle, no worse for wear, clean clothes in dry bags in their backpacks. And as he said to me sometime back, he said, I feel like I'm back in group. And what he means by that is he was special forces. He was in a special forces group. And what he means is, I feel like I'm looking at the equivalent of our special forces guys. Now, I guess the real kicker is kind of like we're not doing, sort of like everything else in this mess, we're not doing anything about that. So we're not grabbing a hold of those 15 guys that just came out of the jungle who seem to be no worse for wear, like they were prepared for this. By the way, if they're coming from China, nobody seems to be curious, where'd they get the money to fly from China and then undertake this? People say things like, well, they're unemployed factory workers because the economy's going south in China. I'm like, okay, but if I don't have a job and I'm living 6 guys to a room in China, where'd I get the money to fly all the way to, typically they fly to places like Ecuador and then navigate all of that. Anyway, the bottom line is you and I could formulate a stack of about 150,000 questions that need to be answered before we feel good about this. And nobody's asking any of those questions. In fact, what they're doing is they're just, as we all know, they're not just letting them into the United States, they're actually then distributing them around the United States, right? So they're putting them on government contract planes and flying them into the heart of our biggest cities. So if you're worried about the possibility that we have terrorist groups sending guys in here, probably the worst thing on the planet you could do would be distribute them all over the country where our largest concentrations of people are. And yet we are doing that.
Okay, and then the obvious question is, why is our own government doing this?
Yeah, well, that's, as we used to say way back in the day, right? That's the $60,000 question, isn't that?
Right.
Probably younger viewers have no idea what that references to. It's to an old game show. But anyway, that's the kicker. I mean, are you really just looking at incompetence? I mean, certainly healthy doses of it, but is that really the full answer? I don't think so. I mean, I think I was going to say psychologically, but maybe ideologically is the better word, right? I think there are a lot of people in this government who don't actually believe in borders or the idea that we should have the right to control our borders. They believe we are a racist, white supremacist, patriarchal, colonial, I don't know how many buzzwords there are now. We're the bad guys, and we're the ones who've been causing all the trouble in the world and everything, and we deserve this. I mean, they literally don't. One of the people who's been pushing for open borders for a long time is Steve Jobs' widow. Okay, Steve Jobs died and he left this massive estate to his widow. I think she's now like the third richest woman in the world. She just has ungodly sums of money.
Mm.
She, of course, has estates on the beach in Malibu and in the
Right,
mountains of California,
right,
and security and fences and all of that. But she's made no secret of the fact that she believes that it's immoral to control your border. And when the Biden administration came in, the person they appointed to be special advisor to basically formulate their policy toward the border, which is get rid of everything.
mm-hmm.
Well, it was a lady who worked for Steve Jobs' widow. I mean, basically ran the foundation she had created to get rid of borders. That person with that ideology stepped into the White House on day one and then drove the policy from the White House to all government agencies.
Yeah.
We don't. So what people need to absorb out of this is that we're not just doing a bad job of controlling the border. It's not just we're incompetent. I mean, these are deliberate policy decisions to touch. And you made reference to Border Patrol. I'll say this again because I think it's important. You see a lot of instances where Border Patrol agents are really furious about this. Like they know what's going on, and
Right.
they know how bad it is, and they're really pushing back on their own management, saying, "Look, man, you're preventing us from doing our jobs, and you're just you're letting it happen. If you had any integrity, what they're saying to their leadership is, you guys would resign tomorrow rather than go along with this."
Let me show Black Lives Matter in Chicago posted this, I guess, meme
Yep.
like 2 days ago. I
Yep. Yep.
stand with Palestine, and it's a picture of, I guess, the Hamas terrorists air gliding into Israel to murder Israelis. And this is from Black Lives Matter in Chicago. What is the link with Black Lives Matter and Antifa? I'm just curious if you can comment on that.
Yeah. Well, one of the things for people to be clear is that in this particular operation that we're talking about, the fighting that's ongoing now, the guys that use these parasails or whatever to cross the border, the Hamas guys, that was in the attack on the music festival,
Right,
where literally there was a rave out in the desert and a bunch of young people dancing.
right, right,
By the way, it was billed as a peace festival, right?
right, right,
These guys paraglide in and then just start using automatic weapons to slaughter people in the desert. I mean, just horrifying, just killing unarmed civilians and mostly young people who were dancing. And actually, people of a mindset where it was all about love, peace, brotherhood. Those are the people that. So the idea that BLM posts a meme celebrating mass murder, it's pretty horrifying. I mean, look, BLM is a Marxist organization. I mean,
right,
people, I think, because they say Black Lives Matter, are hesitant to criticize them because most people would say, of course, Black life matters, just
right,
as all life matter.
right,
But BLM is not about peace and brotherhood and acceptance and let's get past skin color and ethnicity. BLM is a violent Marxist organization, and it expressly wants to tear down the whole political, economic, and social order. And actually, if you just spend a few minutes listening to their leaders talk, they kind of just tell you that every chance they get. They don't pretend to be anything else. So in terms of, direct operational cooperation between Hamas and BLM, I can't say that I know that that's
right,
ongoing, but
right,
certainly they are ideologically aligned with them. Just like people think we're the bad guys in the United States, these kind of folks think the Israelis are the bad guys and they deserve to be slaughtered.
right,
So it's really kind of sick when you think that they call people on the right Nazis,
right.
and then they are fully on board with doing what the Nazis did, which is just murdering Jews.
Well, okay, there are some people who think, well, Hamas and the Palestinians, they just want to have like the two-state solution. If Israel would just give up the West Bank and let the Palestinians have their own nation, then that would likely solve the problem.
Well, look, Hamas, right as it stands right now, the situation in Palestine, using that term very broadly,
Right,
is that there is an Israeli state, and then there are actually two areas fully under Palestinian control,
right,
right? The so-called West Bank, which is where the largest portion of that is governed by the Palestinians. It is an independent state for all practical purposes,
right,
as is Gaza. Gaza just happens to also be under the control of a terrorist group. I mean, Hamas is a terrorist group. I mean, anybody who's watching this, who, just go online and take a few minutes if you can stomach it.
right.
You can find endless videos. Hamas doesn't beat around the bush on what their agenda is. Their agenda is to slaughter every Israeli and exterminate them and wipe Israel from the face of the earth. So their agenda is not a two-state solution. Their agenda is genocide,
Right.
and that's what they've always been about.
Okay, and then I've heard the term that Israel is the little Satan and America is the big Satan. Can,
Yeah.
can you talk about that?
Yeah, well, another important point for all Americans to understand, right? We are, as I was going to say, we're as bad as the Israelis, but no, that's not true. We're worse than the Israelis.
Right.
And Bin Laden always had this doctrine. He described it as the far enemy, by which he meant us, because we weren't immediately in the Middle East. So the war is with us just as much as it is with the Israelis. And the objective is to bring that war here. I mean, look, this is not, I don't intend this as an attack on all Muslims. I've spent a lot of time in the Middle East and worked with a huge number of Muslims who were fighting Islamic terror. In other words, they were on our side.
Right.
This is not a condemnation of the religion. But if these jihadists that we're talking about, Hamas, Hezbollah, I mean, whether we're talking Sunnis or Shia, the various religious divisions within Islam, they're not looking for acceptance. They're not looking for coexistence. This is an expressly religious war for them. They view it in religious terms. This is the apocalypse. This is the Armageddon, whatever makes sense to viewers of this. We're at the end of time. And the way this ends is everyone either becomes Muslim in the way that they define it, or everyone dies. It's not about coexistence. And understand that these guys hate Muslims who don't agree with them more even than they hate Christians or Jews. So back a few years ago, ISIS burned a Jordanian pilot alive. So he was flying missions against ISIS, fighting terrorism. Either shot down or his plane malfunctioned. I don't remember which, but in any event, the pilot had to bail out. He was captured by ISIS. They put him in a cage and they burned him alive. Now, that's not just because they're sick and they are sick. It's because that was an express. He was burned. It was the closest they could get to burning him in the fires of hell. Because in their view, because he was a Muslim fighting them, that was his fate in the afterlife, to burn in the fires of hell. And therefore, it was a religious and a symbolic thing to burn this man alive. So that it tells you the mindset you're dealing with, right? These guys they don't want to sit down and have a conversation and say, let's figure out how we can kind of retreat to neutral corners and get along. That's not how this ends. It ends with you being either you submit or you die. That's how it goes.
Okay, well, I mean, given what you've been talking about, it's obvious that this should be a major topic in the upcoming presidential campaigns.
Yeah.
So I imagine that all the Republican candidates would be talking about the southern border, national security, but I haven't heard them talking about this issue. Maybe they'll start talking. I mean, it is frustrating to me that Obviously, this is a serious problem and it should be discussed. And I feel like my head wants to explode because,
No, I get it.
yeah,
I was in another interview the other day and saying, look, I actually kind of paused in the middle of commenting and said, sometimes I have to just stop to get my head around it, even though I'm immersed in it,
right,
because it is so mind boggling that we could be in this situation that every once in a while you kind of have to take a breath and say, can this be true? I mean, I know it to be true, but can it really be true that in the face of all of this, which is known, of course, to the intelligence community and national security community,
right,
can we really be doing nothing? I mean, at this point, we've admitted in excess of 4 million people illegally into the country since Joe Biden sat down the Oval Office. So with no meaningful checks, every defense we erected after 9/11, everything we did to kind of get a handle on what was going on, it's gone, vaporized. It doesn't exist. And I mean, not that this isn't already horrifying enough, right? I mean, I
right.
get to the point where I feel like I should be wearing a black coat and cloak and carrying a scythe like the Grim Reaper because it's so horrible. But it's, I think,
Yeah.
important for people to understand. 9/11 was never intended by Al Qaeda to be the final attack, nor was it ever intended to be the worst attack.
Mm.
So they were working actively and for years thereafter, in fact, continue to work on chemical, biological, and nuclear programs. At the time we went into Afghanistan, bin Laden personally was in contact with Pakistani nuclear scientists, and he was at the preliminary stages of a discussion about having them build him an atomic bomb. It's not a couple of guys off the street in Karachi who read a book about weapons. I'm talking to guys, very senior guys out of the Pakistani nuclear establishment. And Pakistan, of course, is a nuclear power and has roughly 200 nuclear weapons. Al Qaeda's never walked away from that. ISIS has the same ambitions, so does everybody else. So what I'm saying is, you're not just looking at a repetition of 9/11 or a handful of terrorist attacks. You could potentially be looking at something much worse. And we recognized that after 9/11 and very aggressively went out to prevent that. We erected a bunch of defenses and we went out aggressively to hunt these guys down. All that's over. All that's gone. None of that is happening now. So you're just kind of sitting there waiting for, I mean, you're just rolling the dice every day. I mean, if Al Qaeda wanted to send a team of guys across the southern border to go to New York and stage suicide attacks, they not only would nobody stop them, but probably somebody would buy them plane tickets. That's how sick it is. Like we would actually fly the attack team here at this
Yeah.
point.
I think people don't realize how vulnerable, I mean, our electrical grid, basically defenseless as far as I know. Most of the United States could be without electricity. A lot of people would have no food, no water within days or weeks, or it just,
Electrical grid. I mean, it's an endless list of targets, right?
yeah,
Natural gas pipelines,
right.
right? From fracking areas like in Northeast Pennsylvania, right?
Mm-hmm.
You got pipelines running. I mean, even when they're buried, there are pump stations and so forth all along the way where the lines are above ground. You're talking hundreds of miles of pipeline. There's no security patrol wandering around any of those places. Most of the pump stations are unmanned most days. So how about in February, you just take out the gas supply to major American cities along the eastern seaboard in Boston and New York? They don't have heat anymore. Take down the electrical grid.
Right. I mean, everyone's looking forward to the 2024 election in the hope of replacing Mr. Biden. But I mean, I wonder whether we're going to have an election. I mean, of course, as you well know, or if we do have an election, is it going to be a real election or a fair one? Yeah. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know very well, I share all the exact same concerns. I mean, when you have a guy in the Oval Office and a Department of Homeland Security that specifically refer to his political opponents as violent extremists. We have a new category, MAGA violent extremists.
Mhm.
I mean, if you look at this, what you're doing is establishing the legal foundation to be able to arrest and imprison your opponents. And of course, we can see that that process is formally underway with Donald Trump, right? You're trying to take your political opponent and throw him in prison is what you're trying to do. This is straight out of a banana republic, and yet it's real. So look, I know a lot of former colleagues, very senior, very sober guys who are of the mind exactly what you just said. I don't know if there will be an election in 2024,
Right.
or if somebody will just say, we have indications that there will be disruption in the elections. We're postponing them until such time as we think it's better, which is the classic thing that happens all over Latin America and Africa, right? They don't come right out and say we're establishing a dictatorship. There's always going to be an election. It's just not now, sometime in the future. And it isn't for a while that you wake up and realize, oh, wait, there's never actually going to be an election, is there? We're stuck with these guys.
Okay, well, thank you for ruining my day.
Now that we're all thoroughly depressed, we could just climb back in bed, pull the covers over our heads.
Listen, I want our audience to be aware of Ann magazine. Let me just share that with the audience. Hold on one second. Okay, so this is your article from a few days ago. When does Gaza happen here? And then I saw this morning
we just put out another piece on Hezbollah because talking about the fact that Hezbollah has been prepping for attacks here for a very long time. Yeah, And Magazine, we're Substack, so it's andmagazine.substack.com.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Be sure to go there.
We cut free of Google because and moved to a platform where we do not have advertising, because what we discovered was there's no revelation. We were being censored. Our search results were being suppressed, and we were like, okay, we're done with you guys.
I mean, that's a whole nother topic that maybe we can talk about next time, is the fact that the big tech, they seem to be on board with this anti-American agenda. I mean, I don't know what else to call it. It's just
they're 100%, and there was no question. I mean, we would write articles and publish them, and then you realize that you could. I mean, I would go on the computer and search for my own article under my own name, under the magazine name and the title, and then if it showed up at all, it would be in the 5th page of search results.
Right.
Because this is not accidental. You're being censored. You're being silenced.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for coming on and depressing us. But look, in my view, I want to know the truth. Whether it's depressing or not, I need to know the truth. And whatever happens from there, I mean, that has to be the starting point. So thank you, because you're enlightening us. I really appreciate what you do.
Appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Take care.